Thanks very much, Nolene. Nolene and I go back a long, long time, but from my first unusual meeting with her, I always predicted that Nolene would be a person who would make a major contribution to Australia, and particularly to the North. Can I thank the organisers very much for having me here today, and can I congratulate Northern Gulf for putting on this forum and other forums in the past. And can I also thank very much the ANZ Bank for their substantial contribution to this forum and other forums like this. We don't always like the banks, but the ANZ have certainly put their money where their mouth is in supporting this facility today. The Northern Gulf NRM who have put this on are a wonderful organisation, and as I say, I was sort of around as Minister for Conservation when these NRM groups were first set up, and I've excitedly watched the progress, particularly of the Northern Gulf NRM, which in my mind has always been the standout group amongst NRM organisations right throughout Australia. Can I also thank Barry Hughes, the President of the Gulf Cattlemen's Association, for his introductory remarks and his thought-provoking questions that he threw out to the forum. I would love to have time, and perhaps in my question and answer time we can address some of those, but Barry, you certainly have raised issues that are particularly important to your industry and to this part of the world. I won't comment on all of them at this stage, perhaps later, but clearly your comments about R&D and who runs that are particularly important. They were the subject of a Senate inquiry. They are something I know Barnaby Joyce is thinking about, but what became clear to me during that whole inquiry is that the industry has got to try and find a way to work together because it's your industry and you should be telling us. But I detect that there are not unanimity in a lot of the things that various sectors of the industry want to propose. Neil, thanks for your addresses as well, and thanks to Melissa for doing the hard work in putting this together. Neil, can I just tell you and Rico, don't worry about seeking my permission on photographs. I'm a politician, of course, and as many as you want to take, go right ahead. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Australian beef cattle industry is, as you know, known around the world for its very high standards, its quality and its expertise, and for the substantial contribution it makes to national and local economies. You all know the statistics, but I think it's important just to remind you of them, and we should always keep these statistics in mind because this is an important industry to Australia, and you guys amongst you are leaders of that industry that does so much, not just for the North but for Australia as a whole. Just remember that Australia is the world's second largest beef producer and third largest beef exporter. Our national cattle herd stands at over 29 million head, and the annual value of Australian cattle and calf production tips the scales at the $8 billion mark. We have some 76,800 odd cattle properties nationally, and the red meat industry employs approximately 200,000 workers across farm, processing and retail operation. The cattle industry in Northern Australia is a major part of the whole industry, with the Northern Australian beef herd comprising over 12 million cattle and providing something like 90% of Australia's live cattle exports. ABARES reported in 2013 that the 2010-11 gross value of the agricultural production in the North reached $5.2 billion, of which $3 billion was from cattle alone. So these are truly fascinating figures that show the strength of the great industry that's been built up by people like you in this room. And the coalition government is determined to do everything everything it can to help the industry keep growing. We understand your frustration in the face of what's been seen as a very convoluted process and seemingly endless trade negotiations. But with the announcement of the TPP outcome earlier this week or in recent days, which builds upon the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement and last year's Japanese and Korea agreements, the first step, the commitment, has at least been reached. Nations have agreed to the TPP, but there's still a long way to go as we in the Australian Parliament, together with parliamentarians in all of the TPP countries, get together to battle through their own parliaments to get these treaties approved. And whilst I earlier acknowledged your frustration at the long process, can you spare a thought for us in Parliament over the next few months as we battle with the ALP on the China Free Trade Agreement and sadly with a current Member of Parliament who represents one of the biggest, if not the biggest, beef electorates in this land, who, according to the Herbert River Express, has vowed to sink the TPP. And so they are the frustrations that we in the Federal Parliament will have to deal with over the next few months. And of course, it is the next few months because it's essential that the China agreement be put into effect before the beginning of next year so that we have that year in front of us rather than having to wait 12 months to get all of those reduced tariffs starting to apply. Reaping the benefits of improved terms of trade, of course, is a long-term proposition, which Barry quite rightly mentioned. But it's what the government is attempting to achieve, the right policy settings to create, if not benefits tomorrow, then certainly generational benefits. And these things do, as again Barry has said, take time. And I'll mention a couple of the timelines later on. But the generational benefit for your industry is fabulous, and it really is setting the industry in the right direction. We as a government have also heard your concerns about freight transport, concerns that include the condition of the Croydon-Richmond beef corridor and the Hahn Highway, and about water management strategies. And as I say, the government is absolutely committed to creating a regulatory and governance environment where these concerns can be constructively addressed. And a significant step towards delivery of this commitment was made in June this year when the government fulfilled its election promise to produce a white paper on the development of Northern Australia. The white paper is a wide-ranging document that has renewed the focus of Australia on Northern Australian development by detailing the government's commitments to fostering economic and social growth across the north. It's, as many of you would know, a document that I've been working towards for my entire parliamentary career. As one of the key national industries and certainly one of the key economic pillars of the Northern Australian economy, beef cattle features very significantly in the Northern White Paper. There has been a lot of good news in the White Paper, not just for the beef industry, but for the whole of the North. Now, I know those of us in the North can be a bit cynical about politicians' promises, but this time the promises are already turning into action with much of the funding already budgeted. What matters most are the things we can actually achieve, the real results that we can put on the ground, rather than the dreams and hypotheticals that are just all talk and very often unresearched thought bubbles. Some of you may be aware that on the day the White Paper was released, the then Prime Minister appointed me as chair of a new government committee to oversee the implementation of the commitments in the Northern White Paper. And it will be the role of my committee to monitor delivery of the commitments in the White Paper, to ensure that those initiatives are being rolled out in a timely way, and to seek feedback from our constituents, people like yourselves, and also to work proactively with ministers and their departments to ensure that what has been promised actually happens. Since the creation of that Oversight Committee, my office has been in daily contact with relevant ministers and their staffs, seeking updates and progress reports. And over this time I've written literally dozens of letters to my parliamentary colleagues asking about the status of the Northern Development projects within their portfolios. And where necessary, excuse the language, making a real ass of myself, where I think that bureaucrats are not giving their northern commitments the urgency that we think that they should be doing. Both the Northern Australian White Paper and the subsequently released Agricultural Competitiveness White Paper were written with essential Australian primary producers like yourselves in mind. These two pivotal policy documents show that the things that matter to you, good terms of trade, access to premium markets, biosecurity, water security, transport and communications, are the same things that matter to the government. The northern cattle industry is a standout success story. However, the industry is particularly exposed to the costs of moving cattle, and I don't need to tell any of you in this room about that. You know that the longest land transport distances of any Australian commodity is in the cattle industry. For example, cattle in the Northern Territory travel on average just under 1,000 kilometres between farm and market, and sometimes as much as 2,500 kilometres to abattoirs on the East Coast. Such long distances raise costs. Again, I'm not telling you anything new here. Land transport costs, according to CSIRO, comprise up to 35% of the market price of livestock, and the increased risk to production with floods and seasonal road closures that isolate producers from markets for extended periods of time. The key arterial roads are often the subject of restrictions and closures due to weather events, which affect the movement of freight and people. Outmoded logistics, poorly designed and outdated regulations, or regulatory inconsistencies between jurisdictions also add to the costs. To start addressing these issues, the Commonwealth Government has announced a new $100 million beef roads fund for Northern Australia. As part of this fund, the government, in close consultation with northern jurisdictions, local governments, transport and beef industry experts and leaders, will identify investment and reform priorities for the northern beef industry. I'm sure many of you will be aware, and I believe some of you may have attended the first of a series of beef road roundtables that was held in Rockhampton just over a week ago. The follow-up forums will be held in Darwin and Kununurra over coming months. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing. $100 million isn't going to go very far. The distances involved are vast. The high cost of laying blacktop could mean that only a very few sections of road will actually receive funding for upgrading. In fact, just in the last fortnight, Nolene Eichen and I have driven some of the more critical beef roads, the Hahn Highway, the Croydon-Richmond one, down to Winton, and as you can see, we've lived to tell the tale, a great effort in its own right. But in that fortnight we drove around, I could have easily spent $5 billion and only addressed half of what needs to be done. But the government has introduced a mosaic of road programs that interlink with each other, that attract other investments and confer value across the whole transport network in the north. So as well as the specific $100 million for the Beef Roads Initiative, the beef cattle supply chain will also benefit from a $600 million priority road program where the Hahn highways have been specifically mentioned. They also will benefit from $8 billion being spent on the Bruce Highway under the National Highway Program, the $500 million Black Spot Program, the $200 million new heavy vehicle program, and the $300 million Bridges Renewal Program. And all of these programs and projects will contribute to enhancing the total transport network that's available to beef suppliers. All of these improvements will help to get produce to the market quicker and cheaper. And importantly, the government will be seeking co-investment on priority roads from local and state governments and from the private sector. We'll be using CSIRO's Transport Network Strategic Investment Tool on infrastructure modelling to help us with the best options for upgrading beef supply chains, although as it's been made particularly clear to me over the past few months, the most important people in determining the future of beef roads is people like those in this room who really understand the importance of the beef transport network. It's important, I think, to mention at this point that, and Barry mentioned this as well, that the government is very aware of the need to promote and encourage private sector investment in the meat processing industry across the north. You all know that easier access to abattoirs will alleviate some of the challenges associated with long-haul transport, and of course greater competition in the processing sector can only mean better returns for producers. The Beef Roads Program is just one of the initiatives of the Northern Development White Paper, one that's perhaps close to the hearts and hip pockets of many in this room, but there are many other development initiatives in the White Paper. And I know that over the years we have at various times all heard the same words and promises about northern development, but still nothing's happened. So you might well ask, what's different this time? Well, first of all, we do have a Prime Minister who steadfastly believes in the potential of Northern Australia. Secondly, we have a Cabinet which is likewise convinced of the importance of the North for Australia's economic future. And this Cabinet now includes, for the very first time, a specific Minister for Northern Australia in Josh Frydenberg, who is the Minister for Resources, Energy and Northern Australia. And I'm pleased to say that Josh has already visited Darwin. He'll be in the north again later this month. He may be from inner city Melbourne, but he is intelligent, he's able, he's enthusiastic, he's a very good communicator, and he understands the importance of the north and the critical need to bring the populations of Melbourne and Sydney with us in our development dream. Thirdly, there is the innovation of a government committee to oversight implementation, which I mentioned before. And this committee is new, it's different, it's the first time I've ever seen it in my long time in Parliament, and it is there to keep the executive government and the bureaucracy honest and on track. And finally, the Northern Australian Development White Paper itself is a serious, in-depth document that just doesn't make promises. It actually commits funding to a range of specific projects and actually has a long-term plan for the North. There is the $5 billion concessional infrastructure loans available under the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund. Under this fund, governments will partner with northern jurisdictions, northern states and territories and the private sector partners in the development of needed infrastructure. Don't ask me what exactly that infrastructure means. It is really up to those who want to access the fund to tell the government what they propose, how it will benefit Northern Australia, and the government will come in and assist. And it's a positive sign that the Department of Treasury has already received many expressions of interest from that fund for people wanting to actually access it. Water projects in the north will receive some $200 million in seed funding, the first $50 million of which has been earmarked for feasibility studies. This tranche of funding acknowledges that Northern Australia receives more rainfall, sometimes, believe it, and more runoff than the rest of the country. But it also acknowledges that capturing and managing these water resources is crucial to the development of Northern Australian agriculture and communities. Kickstarting the industry, agriculture and science and innovation in the north is also a priority of the White Paper, and to help facilitate this, $75 million has been committed to a Cooperative Research Centre, or CRC. This CRC is currently in the planning stages, and I expect that an interim chairman will be appointed in the very near future to oversee the creation of this pivotal Northern Australian institution. $40 million, as you might recall, has been committed to upgrading regional aviation access and to facilitate further remote airstrip upgrade. There is also a commitment supported by money to resolve outstanding native title claims within 10 years, to give pastoralists across the north far greater certainty of land tenure. Already we're seeing some innovative producers in the north negotiating directly with native title holders to find solutions that provide for growth and employment opportunities, while at the same time conferring benefits on the holders of native title, benefits that our native title system has so far, in my view, failed to provide. Land titles desperately needs coordination and certainty across the north. And whilst land title regulation is principally a matter for states and territory governments, the Commonwealth is determined to encourage by every means available some rationalisation and reform. And those of you that have read the White Paper will realise that this is discussed at quite some length in that document. We have an opportunity right now to position Australia as a high-quality, high-end producer to the world. The proximity to Asia and the tropical zone, both of which are experiencing unprecedented growth, means that our future depends on our ability to carve out niche markets for ourselves as the size of the global middle class explodes in our neighbourhood. The federal government is committed to making sure that producers like you have every opportunity to make the most of these existing and emerging markets. I mentioned before the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Over 55% of Australia's beef exports go to TPP countries. TPP market access outcomes for Australian beef producers are long and many. And I have a list, but I won't take the time to mention them. Suffice it to say that building upon the Japanese free trade agreement, Japan's beef tariffs will now be reduced to 9% within 15 years, a bit each year, until we get to that goal. Australian beef exports to Japan, as you know, are valued at some $1.6 billion in 2014. The majority of Japan's tariffs on offal will be eliminated completely over 10 to 15 years, and tariffs on cheek and head meat significantly reduced to 9% within 15 years. And so it goes on. There's reduction in processed meats to Japan, elimination of the United States price-based safeguard, elimination of Canadian beef tariffs within 10 years, Peruvian, Mexican tariffs all come down all of which will benefit the Australian industry. But sustaining our access to all of these markets in the Pacific region will require us to build substantial goodwill with our regional neighbours. And the more we cooperate with each other, the more the goodwill we build. The Colombo Plan and the Reverse Colombo Plan of shared export education programs, where youth from Australia have the opportunity to study overseas and vice versa, in these programs, fosters that understanding and goodwill that is so essential to Australia's future trade. Sharing in our technology and expertise across developing nations in the region is another way that Australia can contribute to develop that productive relationship with our regional partners. The work done by the Australian Institute of Tropical Health and Medicine, based at James Cook University in Townsville and Cairns, will benefit the entire tropic zone by improving the prevention and treatment of tropical diseases. Animal health and management of biosecurity risks are also top of mind for the government when considering priorities in Northern Australia. Effective quarantine and border protection management is critical to the prosperity of northern agricultural industries, and addressing these risk factors will be a key element in the workload of the new Northern Australian CRC. Underlying all of this will be our necessity to identify and take advantage of the synergies that will remain the key to our success in developing the North. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing, I just want to say a couple of words about the agricultural competitiveness white paper, which was published in July, and that sets out a program of investment in the competitive strength of the Australian agriculture industry. The white paper presents a $4 billion package designed to create better returns at the farm gate. The initiatives in the agriculture white paper include up to $250 million per year in drought concessional loans, but I accept that we haven't quite got that right, but the intention and the commitment are there. We just have to make sure that in the next little while we get the rules right. There's also $200 million to improve biosecurity surveillance, $50 million to boost pest and disease eradication, $100 million to extend rural R&D, which Barry rightly spoke about, to ensure that farmers keep getting the benefits of innovation straight from the laboratory to the farm. There is some $35 million for local products and product infrastructure to create jobs in communities that are affected by drought. There's almost $30 million in farm insurance and risk management advice, $22 odd million in case management for farmers in the third year of the Farm Household Allowance Scheme. There's $21 million to streamline access to farm chemicals and $14 million to provide farmers with access to information that will help them establish new business models. And that's just to name a few of the things that are in the agriculture white paper. Ladies and gentlemen, the commitments made recently by the federal government to regional and rural communities and producers are valued in the billions of dollars. There's no mistaking that the Coalition does not hesitate to acknowledge agriculture as a key pillar in the Australian economy. And nowhere is this more obvious or more important than in the north of Queensland. You people are the backbone of the future economy here in the north as we transition from the mining boom to the dining boom, where we will be feeding tens of millions of additional people right around the world. And this is why your government is committed to your success. This is why, wherever possible, your government seeks to facilitate technical market improvements and policy developments that will increase your competitiveness. You are part of the future of our national economy, and I look forward to seeing you all prosper. Your prosperity is essential, because if you prosper, so does Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, again, can I thank you very much for having me with you this morning. It's great to be with a group of people who, even in challenging times, always take the right step forward, and that's why I love coming and speaking to people like you. Chair, if it's appropriate, I'm happy to take any questions and try and answer them, but again, thanks very much for having me with you, and good luck for your future.
Thank you very much, Ian. Is there any questions from the floor for Ian? Let's take 2 or 3. Terry and Greg, 2, and Barry, 3. I knew those 3 would ask questions. Terry?
Are we on? Yes. Senator, as you know, I helped work on that white paper, and one of the main things I really pushed was the infrastructure for our area out here. Now, while we have a beef road going through from Georgetown all the way through, the people down around Linesley, and you've just travelled that road, we have no road whatsoever. The damage done to our vehicles is unaccountable, and we've just had 2 rollovers with caravans. Now, being the Senator and the Chair for this area, could you possibly draw some more money to fix up those sort of roads and give us better conditions?
Yeah, Terry, thanks for the question, and by asking it, you remind me something I should have acknowledged, that there are a number of people in this room who in one form or another made a very significant and very worthwhile contribution to that white paper. And for all of you who did that, and you'll know who you are, but my thanks for that. Terry, are you talking about the road from the Lynn to Ainsley?
Yes.
Okay. I've driven that twice in the last 2 weeks, and I've seen worse roads. But you asked me, I think the question was, can I give you a guarantee that it'll be upgraded? No, I can't. I am not the Minister, and I've explained that there is a lot of money, but it is a limited money. But what we've got to do is get the industry to say to us, that is the most important. That's the priority road. And if that happens, yes, I can guarantee that it will be fixed. But it's up to the industry to tell us on the funds available. I repeat, there are a lot of funds, but it is limited. So we have to get the best bang for our buck, and if the industry comes to the government and says that is #1 priority, then I'm sure it will be done. I'm not sure that the industry will say that, but with people like yourself, Terry, and others advocating, it will be up there amongst them. But look, you know, you are the people that tell me, I've been convinced, perhaps by the wrong people, that the Croydon-Richmond road is probably the most important. But again, I emphasise that I'm not making the decision, certainly not today. But it's people like yourselves who will tell us where that money should go.
Greg?
Yeah, Senator, in Northern Australia we live in probably the only unspoiled area in the world, and I'd like a guarantee from you, because I'm not confident at the moment that the government can manage the development that's going to occur without spoiling the natural environment that we have at the moment, especially with the projects that are not government funded and driven by private individuals.
Well, Greg, I think I can give that guarantee. You know, the last thing the government wants, and the last thing farmers want, is to destroy the golden egg, which is our environment. And farmers know that better than anyone else, and so do So to government. We do have a lot of regulation in place. Many, including myself, will say too much irrelevant regulation. And addressing some of the more insane elements of the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act has to be first on the agenda. But I think you'll find that of all countries in the world, Australia has a better record in its environment protection than most other countries in the world, and certainly a much better record than many of those on UN committees who are trying to tell Australia what Australia should be doing themselves. Australia has a very good record on most environmental aspects, and we understand how important it is that we should protect that environment. You clearly articulate that same concern, and I'm sure everyone in this room has the same concern as you. But we have to have development. We've just got to make sure that it is sustainable, that it's done in the right way. But importantly, and I do make this commitment, we have to ensure that the processes of getting development going in a sustainable way are shortened and cannot be hijacked by those whose real interest isn't in the environment, but in, I often think, simply destroying our standard of living in Australia.
Thanks, Ian. And I'd also like to acknowledge your response to some of the questions that were raised. It's always good to get feedback from people like yourself in regard to how this government and the way that you go about doing business with our industry is very good to hear here this morning. Having been in Darwin last week in discussions with the NTCA and Kimberley Cattlemen's Association over a range of issues, one of the things that came up was the Northern Australian development process, and we were fortunate enough to have Luke Bowen in the room with us. And one of the impediments that was raised there was to do with rail road net corridors across state and territory borders. Now, I know this may be just getting away a little bit into state legislative processes, but could you maybe shine some light in regard to how those impediments in terms of the bureaucratic process having the potential to slow down the development of some of these projects or processes, so we don't see a prolonged, drawn-out process where missed opportunities and erosion of confidence in regard to getting rubber on the road in terms of these projects getting started.
Thanks, Barry. Again, a very good question, and meeting with Luke Bowen is the right person to meet with. He's the sort of bureaucrat who will help drive Northern development. Bureaucrats generally are wonderful people. They're very committed, they're very professional, they're very learned, but they sometimes don't understand living in Canberra just what it's like out here, and they don't understand the urgency at times. Luke, of course, living in the north, does. Bureaucrats can make anything difficult, but that's where politicians and particularly ministers have to do what the people they represent, the Australian voters, people like yourselves, for what they want, and have to make sure that the bureaucracy keeps to its task. And that's one of the roles of the Oversight Committee that I'm on. And as I say, I'm quite happy at my stage in life to make, and I'll use the words again with an apology, but I'm quite happy to make an arsehole of myself with every bureaucrat, as long as it keeps them focused on what needs to be done. Now, you're talking specifically about road and rail. As you know, I think it was announced, wasn't it? To the General Director. Yeah. Just recently, if it wasn't announced, but it's about to be announced, that the feasibility study into the Mount Isa Tennant Creek rail extension was announced just a couple of days ago. Feasibility, looking at it, seeing what it would cost, whether it's a benefit. At the same time, the feasibility study for upgrading the Mount Isa, Cloncurry, Townsville rail line was also announced, and those of you perhaps a little bit north to be directly involved, well, that's probably not right, but you know, that rail line desperately needs upgrading and better management, and the feasibility study will look at that too. With the roads across the borders, at Commonwealth level, we try to say, look, the Commonwealth will put in a lot of money to this road, but we ask that the states contribute just 20%. In early days it used to be 50-50, but we've given away any hope of trying to get any state or territory government to contribute 50%, so we only ask for 20%. And there are some problems there. I've been very closely involved with the Outback Way, again a bit farther, bit southern for many of you in this room, but that was an idea to get a road from effectively Cairns to Perth, Winton to Laverton, across Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia. And I've been closely involved in that for over 20 years. And I know the difficulties there, not so much of getting Commonwealth funding, but getting the states who actually are the road construction people, the project management people. And I keep asking Warren Trust, why can't we try and get not a federal department of road construction, heaven forbid, we don't need another double up bureaucracy, but one person who could let contracts to the Etheridge Shire Council to actually, you know, do 20 kilometres of the Hahn Highway. And there are difficulties there with the national agreements on road funding and road transport. They involve through COAG all of the states. There are difficulties, and I don't want to bore you with our problems, but they are difficulties that we simply have to resolve. So where you see these problems, and where Luke sees these problems, and I'm sure he will, then we need to get onto them and just make sure they happen. And I need you people, where it involves you, to keep in touch with me, and I'll do what I can to make sure what needs to be done is done. And I hope that in the not too distant future I'll have some other help in the Federal Parliament from someone out this way who can also help with those things. So that is important. Can I just mention the Office of Northern Australia will be re-established in the north, mainly in Darwin, although there will be an office in Townsville. I know they're looking closely at who will head that up, and I know of a number of very, very high-profile, very, very capable Australians who have applied for that job. So I'm hopeful that once that office starts in the north, things like what you're talking about, Barry, will from another angle as well be always front of mind of government.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join me in showing your appreciation to Ian for his